The Faulkner County prosecutor asking for state police to investigating an issue Fox 16 has been digging into for months. Whether a small Arkansas town is operating as a speed trap to generate revenues. Now, based on court data we have been combing through for weeks, Damascus police wrote more than 13,000 tickets for speeding and unsafe driving since 2010. Fast forward to 2015, 75% of all citations were for speeding and unsafe driving, and 82% of court fees paid in were for those same types of citations, resulting in millions of dollars worth of payments. Fox 16 investigates as Marcy Manley takes a deeper look at the money being generated and what the law allows.
What is the difference in a law enforcement officer going out there using his authority to rob someone than someone stopping you and pulling a gun on you and robbing you?
Back in April, Bud McMunn told us he spent more than 3 decades in law enforcement, but when he inquired about working at the Damascus Police Department, something didn't seem right.
Is it akin to highway robbery?
That's what I call it. Stop the rob, using your authority to stop the people and rob them.
According to him, the department's police chief said the focus was on highway patrol, specifically speeders from out of town.
They rely on this revenue to keep the little cities, afloat.
Arkansas law bans speed traps, meaning a department can't write more than half of its speeding tickets for less than 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. Or it can't generate revenue that exceeds more than 30% of the previous year's expenses from traffic violations on the highway. Either is a violation.
We want to make sure that when we enforce our laws, it's not about creating more money for anyone.
And that's the crux of it for prosecutor Cody Highland, who is now asking state police to investigate the department.
It's festered for a while, and so let's go ahead and resolve it and determine whether or not the numbers meet the threshold under state law.
According to Highland, the city welcomes the review and agreed with him that it would be a good idea to get an outside analysis.
That perception that there is a speed trap, and it's pretty widespread. And so, when you combine that with the city's interest in making sure that they protect their reputation and, want the facts to determine whether they're a speed trap or not.
But back in April, when Fox 16 started asking the city for citation data under Freedom of Information, City Attorney Bo Wilcox agreed to turn over the records, but wrote us back saying, in part, "I do not see the compelling public interest served by data concerning speeding citations."
The numbers tell the story, and that's why you ask for the investigation.
We don't know which formula state police will use for its calculations, but according to official audits of the city and water department, city expenses came in at roughly $1.3 million in 2014. But in 2015, according to data we obtained directly from the court, fines paid on just speeding and unsafe driving citations brought in more than $600,000 in revenues, or about 46%.
They're supposed to be serving and protecting. They're not supposed to be out there, taking advantage of the people.
We got those same court records for surrounding cities, and what we found is that between 2010 and April of this year, Damascus, here on Highway 65 with a population of 385, got more than $2.5 million in fines and fees just from speeding and unsafe driving tickets. Greenbrier, which is 12 times the size, brought in just under $740,000, or a third of that amount. Clinton is 6 times the size of Damascus on the same highway and brought in just $300,000 for speeding or unsafe driving tickets. So based on the city court's own records, Damascus, the smallest city, generated 3 times the amount of money from speeding and unsafe driving citations. You see it as an abuse of authority.
A Gestapo police officer, and I got no use for him.
McMunn not sure what's to come down the road for Damascus, but he hopes a closer look stops the practice of what he sees as taxation by citation.
With great power comes great responsibility.
So here is the Fox 16 bottom line. Arkansas State Police will handle the investigation with help from legislative audit. If it finds Damascus is in violation, Highland could decide to bar the department from writing any more tickets, or all of the money from tickets written would be diverted to the school district. The police chief did decline to comment on camera, and so far we have not received an official response. Hearing from a number of drivers who have complained.
Hodge is telling Fox 16 investigates he wants to see reforms to keep cities from practicing what he calls taxation by citation, as one town is under investigation tonight.
Marcy Manley digging more into how the law works and who's policing how much law enforcement brings in from speeding tickets as well as other citations.
think anyone that hears those numbers would be shocked.
Representative Grant Hodges reacting to the numbers the city of Damascus court reported had been paid in for speeding and unsafe driving citations since 2010.
I think it's pretty obvious to anyone who sees it based on the size of the town and the amount of revenue they're getting that something's wrong. Citation money?
Now he's doubling down on reforms he believes may be needed in the next session for how the state monitors small cities and suspected speed traps.
Some other states, I think, have rightly called this taxation by citation. Rather than a legitimate, transparent tax, they're getting revenue by essentially abusing the law.
On Friday, Faulkner County Prosecutor Cody Highland announced he was requesting a state police investigation into the Damascus Police Department to determine if it was operating a speed trap. That means they would be writing more than 50% of citations for under 10 miles an hour over, or revenue from traffic violations and local ordinances on the highway exceeds 30% of their city's expenses.
It's festered for a while, and so let's go ahead and resolve it and determine whether or not the numbers meet the threshold under state law.
Now Hodges, after seeing our report, saying more needs to be done on the state's end to monitor revenues generated by citations.
Just in my initial research into this issue, I think the enforcement piece is really what's missing.
District courts take in the money from tickets, and they're supposed to file this report here at Finance and Administration of certain fees. And here across the street at the administrative office of the courts, the clerks filed this report of all the cases they handle and all the money they collect. But both agencies tell me these numbers are self-reported, and neither audits them or compares them to one another. So how accurate are these reports? Who knows?
Now we can put as many laws as we want on the books, but they essentially can ignore them because we don't have an enforcement mechanism.
Initially written it under the speeding and then scratched it out, and it was like unsafe driving instead.
Another issue Hodges wasn't aware of, cities using local ordinances to cite speeders.
I don't know exactly how cities are using ordinances like this.
In Damascus, drivers are routinely ticketed for unsafe driving, which is a local ordinance, instead of speeding, despite speeding being the cause written on the majority of tickets. The fine for unsafe driving can go up to $250 as set by ordinance, and it's routinely recorded at $190 in the system, whereas the majority of speeding tickets are below that amount, according to records we obtained from the court.
Personally, I feel like, if you're speeding on a state highway, you should get a speeding ticket just like everyone else. And I think we've maybe created some incentives where cities might be using this other ticketing system so they can keep more of the money.
Hodges asking Arkansas drivers who feel they've been victims of speed traps to call local legislators.
I don't think anyone wins in this system.
So those who make the laws can know if the problem is widespread across the state.
So let's take a look and see.
Hodges also wants to consider changing the law so that legislators can initiate speed trap investigations, saying prosecutor caseloads are heavy enough as it is.
Now, these insiders telling Fox 16 Investigates officers are instructed to focus on out-of-town motorists who are more likely to pay tickets without putting up a fuss.
And officers have told our Marcy Manley they're required to make a certain amount of stops and write citations or face losing their jobs, even though in Arkansas, that's against the law.
Police officer that stops to rob, I think is pathetic.
Bud McMunn first brought his concerns to us back in April over a memo he claimed he was given by the Damascus police chief after inquiring about a job. The chief's memo, he said, spelled out what Damascus PD were doing.
That's the way I took it out of context, that he wanted, X amount of citations written.
We obtained a copy of that memo from a former employee after our FOI requests to the city went unfilled. It spells out an officer must make 7 contacts per shift. They're told their primary job is to work traffic because of low call volume, and explains they should write citations for the local unsafe driving ordinance on different tickets because they're not reported to the state.
I said, well, that's telling me that that's a quota.
According to a recent Damascus employee who asked not to be identified due to fear of retaliation, that's exactly what's happening.
It's a money-driven, greed-driven department, and the town is behind them 100%.
I worked last week, and I got contacts all week.
Fox 16 Investigates was provided this audio. We're told it features Chief Rick Perry addressing officers in a department-wide meeting.
Find something else and stop most time. Oh, I did.
That's just 4 days after a state police investigation was requested to determine if the department was operating a speed trap.
It's very crucial because we all know how we survive here.
According to our source, other officers we spoke with and a sample of dozens of speeding citations, tickets to locals virtually non-existent. Others are the target.
Anybody else is fair game.
We're talking out-of-towners.
Out-of-towners, yes, people that live in other parts of the state. Especially out-of-towners, they've never been through here before.
And officers are not sitting to tag them near the main drag, but waiting right at where the speed limit plummets.
They sit up on the hill, probably a quarter of a mile from the 45-mile-an-hour sign. And a quarter of a mile is not much. When you run 60 miles an hour, you're there in a heartbeat.
There's roughly a tenth of a mile between the warning sign of a speed zone ahead and where it drops from 60 to 45.
You're doing 15 over, you're going to get stopped. When you've got thousands of cars coming through a day, that generates a lot of revenue.
According to financial statements from the city, year after year, the biggest chunk of money from these tickets, hundreds of thousands of dollars, is transferred right back into the police department, with some funds spread out to help shore up the city budget.
There's a direct incentive, though, for if the police department wants to exist, it has to write tickets to do so.
Exactly. Yes. I know firsthand that if you don't write citations, then they let you go.
That's not how you police.
When prosecutor Cody Highland first announced he was requesting an ASP investigation into Damascus, we asked him in general about quotas for a police force. He had no knowledge of the memo.
You police based on something happening and reacting to that.
Not, I have to stop 7 people, I have to make contact with 7 people, or however it's phrased.
It's about individual actions by people that violate the law and law enforcement responding. And it's not about setting a predetermined quota as to what needs to happen. This is not sales. This is law enforcement.
According to those officers we spoke with, there is absolutely zero discretion they feel they can employ in the Damascus PD.
There's been tickets that I've written, there's been tickets that other officers have written in this town that they weren't happy with. They didn't really want to do it, but they had to, because it was either write them or you don't have a job.
In the recording, the chief expresses it's an officer's choice and alludes to public safety.
Pull somebody over, that's up to you. What do you want to give a citation on?
But in nearly the next breath,
You say several contacts?
Yeah, 7 contacts. I mean, but if our revenue's not there, I mean, it's it comes after that.
We're supposed to be here to serve and protect, and that's not what we're doing. We're here to make money. It's a business, is what it is. And it's about as far from being a police officer and doing our jobs as it can get.
Is the chief here? We asked to talk to Chief Perry for his explanation. We were told he was out of the office.
Could I leave a message for him to call me?
And we checked back in. We still haven't heard back from him.
It's all in this chief memo.
But he made it clear in the message to officers.
If we have to have 7 contacts, I just want to know what's a contact?
Exactly, contacts. That's my opinion.
It remains to be seen if this department of 6 officers for a town of less than 400 can continue to ticket the unsuspecting masses like Bud McMunn alleged.
That's what I call it. Stop the rob. Using your authority to stop the people and rob them.
Policing under the guise of protecting to serve, but in the name of dollars and cents. For Fox 16 Investigates, I'm Marcy Manley.
Very interesting. Now, what we found based on court records indicates the money in fees and fines paid into Damascus District Court actually increased in 2013. That's when Rick Perry became chief, and since then it's just kept going up.
Okay, so now let's just take a look at the numbers. I want to show you something here. In 2012, it was just over $191,000 from speeding and unsafe driving tickets. 2013, look what happened. It rose to almost $400,000. And then in 2014, the amount of revenue went up again, nearly $475,000. But get this, last year, the department raked in well over $600,000. As of the end of April of this year, the total right now, well, as of the end of April, like I said, is $167,000.